Every American law student learns the exact same case on the first day of civil procedure. Pennoyer v. Neff, decided in 1878, serves as the universal first lesson in how far a court's power actually reaches. The case defines service of process, the legal mechanism a court uses to assert power over a defendant. It divides that power into two categories: in personam, direct authority over a person, and in rem, authority over property. Writing for the Supreme Court, Justice Stephen J. Field declared that state borders are hard limits on legal power. To sue an out-of-state resident, a court needs physical service inside the state borders. Alternatively, the plaintiff can attach the defendant's property before the lawsuit begins, a maneuver known as quasi-in rem jurisdiction. For over a century, the Legal Academy has treated this ruling as a masterpiece of constitutional logic. But the surviving paper trail suggests the logic was built on a messy, fraudulent foundation. In 1987, legal scholar Wendy Collins Perdue published an investigative reconstruction of the case. She bypassed the standard textbooks and dug into the original archives to uncover the actual relationship between the men involved. Her findings expose a sharp disconnect between the Supreme Court's high-minded doctrinal prose and the factual record of the dispute. The timeline actually begins a decade before the Supreme Court decision, playing out in the untamed landscape of 1860s Multnomah County, Oregon. The court's prose suggests a high-level debate over state sovereignty, but the archival record leads back to a local courtroom and a pattern of deception. The target was an illiterate homesteader named Marcus Neff. He traveled west to claim 320 acres of territory under the 1850 Donation Land Claim Act. Neff hired a local lawyer named John H. Mitchell. Mitchell was actually operating under an alias. His real name was John Hipple, and he had recently fled his teaching job in Pennsylvania with $4,000 of stolen client funds. Mitchell engineered a debt collection scam. He claimed Neff owed him roughly $300 for unpaid legal fees. Knowing Neff had since relocated to California, Mitchell utilized a legal loophole called service by publication. He printed a tiny notice in an obscure Oregon religious newspaper. Neff, completely unaware of the publication, failed to appear in state court. Mitchell easily secured a default judgment, an automatic legal victory granted when a defendant does not respond. To satisfy this supposed debt, the local sheriff seized Neff's 320 acres and sold them at auction. The highest bidder was Mitchell himself, who eventually flipped the land to a buyer named Sylvester Pennoyer. These are the literal, mechanical steps a conman used to legally steal his own client's real estate under the cover of local procedure. A decade later, Neff returned to Oregon. Finding Pennoyer occupying his land, Neff filed a lawsuit in the U.S. Circuit Court for the District of Oregon to evict him, an action known as an injectment suit. Federal Judge Matthew Dady ruled in Neff's favor, but he ignored the broader constitutional implications entirely. He returned the land to Neff based on a narrow technicality, noting that the newspaper affidavit was signed by an editor rather than a printer. Pennoyer appealed to the Supreme Court. There, Justice Field completely ignored Judge Dady's simple technical fix, opting instead to use this messy local dispute to build an expansive constitutional framework. Field weaponized the 14th Amendment's Due Process Clause. He declared that a state court exercising power over an absent non-resident violated the defendant's due process rights, rendering the original Oregon judgment void. This timeline reveals a severe chronological problem with the holding. The underlying state court scam happened in 1865. The 14th Amendment wasn't ratified until 1868. Field applied a non-existent constitutional amendment backward in time. His rule of territoriality appears to be a highly motivated, after-the-fact construction designed to punish a grifter. Sylvester Pennoyer went on to become the governor of Oregon. He remained so bitter about the loss of the property that he used his 1887 inaugural address to publicly complain about the Supreme Court stealing his land. John H. Mitchell survived the immediate scandal and was elected as a Republican United States Senator. He served for years before being convicted in the 1905 Oregon land fraud scandal. Justice Field's reaction to Mitchell's grift solidified into dogma. For 70 years, courts treated state borders as stone walls that restricted legal authority. That rigid doctrine held until the 1945 case International Shoe Company v. Washington. The court finally replaced strict physical presence with the modern standard, requiring only that a defendant have minimum contacts with the state. Yet Pennoyer's ghost remains active. In 1990, in Burnham v. Superior Court, the Supreme Court explicitly preserved Field's role that mere physical presence in a territory is still a sufficient basis for jurisdiction. We revere constitutional doctrines as timeless truths, but the archival paper trail reveals these principles are often the sanitized fallout of a